Despite historic advancements in science and medicine, nearly 2/3 of pharmaceutical launches still fall short of expectations. In this interview, Within3 CEO Lance Hill and CTO of AI and Analytics Jason Smith will explore why traditional pharma launch models are no longer fit for today's market, and how their AI tool, Launch Intelligence, offers a new path forward. They'll share how pharma teams can move beyond rigid planning to embrace agility, foresight, and collaboration, and drive real launch success. I'm Lesha Bushak, pharma editor at MM+M, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Within3. Lance and Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So 2/3 of pharma launches still fall short of expectations. That's a pretty significant number. What would you say is behind sort of that broken model and why that's a problem?
I think one of the big reasons is misunderstanding the market. If you look at how cost and time is allocated to a launch, usually more than 50% of the cost and time is in planning, content support, and maybe 50%, but usually less, in actual engagement with customers and execution. And when you have that much money being spent up front, the reason for that is because it's such a difficult process and a long process to understand, plan, execute, train, communicate, etc. And so you're kind of locked into a course of action. If you've misunderstood the market at all, or the market shifts, the traditional way we've done things takes so long to realize that, to see those signals and react to them, that your momentum is still carrying you in the wrong direction. And so the idea that you can, several years out, understand the market perfectly, plan to launch and execute it, and not have any of those course corrections needed that quickly is low. And that's why I think we see such a large number of misfires and missed targets on launches.
And you argue that your tool, Launch Intelligence, isn't just a new tool, but it's also an entirely new way of thinking. Can you tell me a little bit about how it works, and can you share an example of how it changes decision making in real time?
Sure. I think going back to how money is spent today and how much time is spent in kind of that planning upfront piece. If you think of it back to that GPS map analogy, if you have a paper map and you're driving and you've planned your route, it's not just, hey, we need to make a change and kind of go back to the paper route, the paper map, and make a difference. But really what happens is you're driving for some period of time down the wrong way, and you at some point realize, oh my gosh, we're off target, we're off plan, something's different. And now I have to reassess where I am, find the new route back to where I think the target's supposed to be, and then map that through the paper map and go. That whole process, the time it takes you to realize you're off target, the time it takes you to recalibrate, the time it takes you to get back on target, all of that are delays that a launch can't afford. With a tool like what we have, it's much more like a GPS. So it's not just that moment where, hey, I need to change something, let me help understand. But even when I start to drift off target, the tool can help you realize that right away. It can give you signals much faster. And so as a pharma launcher, what I'm doing instead of focusing on this kind of long-running planning is instead I am focusing on being able to quickly adapt and change course, because I have this wealth of information that's being served up to me very seamlessly. So that creates a whole different emphasis on the role of someone in a launch and where the value really is. It lets the person driving launch strategy really focus on strategy and alignment, and less on individual tactics, rework, doing things over and over again, creating the 15th patient journey along this launch, and all those things that happen today that are really wasteful.
How is Within3's AI different, and why is it uniquely built to support pharma commercial teams in making smarter and faster launch and marketing decisions? Obviously there's been so many AI tools that have launched recently. How would you differentiate yours?
It's a great question. I think it starts with what is the outcome we're looking for, right? So many AI tools that are on the market today are so focused on, I need data and I want to answer something about this point in time with the data. Where we really stepped back was we looked at the whole market and the whole understanding from A to Z of launch, and be able to look at that and kind of come from, what are the outcomes we need? Well, the outcomes are we need to get therapeutics to patients faster and safer. That's the idea of launch. And if you're a company trying to build that, you have to know where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, and find those signals quickly to adjust from. So when you take the kind of top-down approach, while we have the deep, 20 plus years of understanding of the bottom up of the data and analytics behind that, that gives us a very different model out of the gate. So we're able to orchestrate and build many, many small models that are contextually aware of not just the data of the therapeutic, but also who's engaged, where are the patients at, where are they at geographically, how do they speak, even all the way through to how do you engage HCPs in the right way. So again, I think it's the end-to-end and the top-down, bottom-up coming together provides multiple layers of intelligence that other solutions that are just siloed looking at only claims data or only HCP engagement data, they're solving a data point problem, not a holistic outcome to a better launch.
Yeah, I think we've done two things really well with this product. One is the product, if you look at a generic Gen AI tool that's in the market and you ask it questions around launch, it does not have access to the right data shaped in the right way to reflect what the actual market is. So it gives you very generic sorts of answers, and we can all see that. So one of the things that we've done in a really intelligent way is how do you bring together massive data sets that reflect the market. Here's the therapy, I'm launching in these regions, here are the stakeholders that are involved in that, here's the competitive set that I'm curious and interested in, here are the different specialties that matter. Bring all the data around that, both internal and outside the organization, together quickly. I think a lot of larger companies are trying to build things internally and they're struggling with that step. How do I bring all that data together? Once you have that market model, you can then inspect it with AI, and it's far more accurate than just inspecting a generic claims data set, as you were talking about, Jason. So the second thing I think we've done really well is then the AI analytics on top. How to use various AI techniques to inspect that holistic data set. So when we implement our tool, it's not like brand one in the same therapy area is getting the same implementation as brand two, because brand one's definition of market is going to be different.
Yep.
And if we gave them a generic version of our tool, the results would not be as accurate.
How are companies actually implementing these solutions today? Can you give me some examples? Like, what does adoption look like across commercial and cross-functional teams? I'd love to hear how it's playing out, in the real world.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll hit it from a couple of different ways. So when we first developed this product, historically our business was very focused on medical affairs predominantly. So probably 2/3 of our work was in the medical affairs arena. And so when we first built this product, we built it with more of a medical affairs headset. What happened is some of our customers got their hands on the product. We started to get a lot of inbound interest from commercial teams, because the same thing that we were working earlier in the commercialization process around trying to identify unmet needs and education gaps and things like this, they looked at that and said, can you also help me then start understanding market signals from a launch point of view? So today we're much more 50-50 between those two organizations. And the cool thing about launch is a lot of times organizations, even if it's in a matrix way, the larger ones will blend medical and commercial together at the right times across the launch continuum, and we can handle that seamlessly. So for large organizations, we tend to see therapies where the focus is really on launch results gravitate towards something like us. Oftentimes the larger companies already have significant investments in different types of data. We can pull that into our analytics very seamlessly and partner with what they've got internally, as opposed to trying to replace things that they've already invested in. For the smaller, the flip side is we also work with many small biotechs who we have an asset or two or three that's traveling through the pipeline. They're preparing for commercialization of that asset along the way. Those organizations don't have sophisticated sets of data, don't have sophisticated processes, and so we're able to really lean in with those organizations. We offer a lot of consulting service with what we do as well to both large and small companies, but for small companies, really augmenting their teams so that they can operate as though they're much larger than they in fact are.
I think building on that, one of the pieces that we've, as we deployed, as Lance said, we started medical affairs, kind of moved out. That also gave us a different chance to look at how you engage in these type of tools and solutions, where how do you put something in the hands of individuals that is intuitive out of the gate, right? So you can easily move and firewall between commercial and medical and marketing and teams, all within that same ubiquitous data set that Lance mentioned earlier, and the AI on top of it. So that allows us to move between those organizations and support big and small very quickly and deploy very quickly into them.
In a competitive market, how can commercial teams use these insights to differentiate their brand, make sure that they're planning for competitor moves and also capturing more share effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you are launching into either a highly competitive market or a new market for you as an organization, that's where market intelligence and signals and launch intelligence are so critical. Because you may have your plan, but the market you're involved with is changing based on what your competitors are doing. Every Congress, they're releasing new things. They're working with different key opinion leaders. They're pushing different messages into the market. They're countering what you're trying to do. They're trying to anticipate, when are you launching? Do we know? What are we trying to set up? And in that sort of a dynamic market, the faster you can understand what that is looking like, and then also go on offense, understand based on what they are doing, how can we not only counter that, but use that to our advantage? I think an organization that can do that really, really well can carve out additional market share and get more therapy to the right patients. Unfortunately, the world we live in, as we all know, it's not always, and usually not even usually, about which science is slightly better than someone else's science. It's really about who was able to get the stakeholders to understand what's possible with this therapy and rethink clinical practice or rethink access around a particular therapy. And so one of the things our tool is really, really good at is taking that noise, all of those disjoint things that are happening from multiple competitors, integrating them all together, and then overlaying that with other data sets to give actionable things that one can do based on what we're seeing in different markets, as opposed to just kind of high-level sorts of analyses. And I think the speed at which we can do it is interesting as well, using this technology. So it's not let us have our CI team go run a market research study and come back weeks and months later, or let us just go off a small end of a couple of points of feedback we're getting from the field and try to make a hasty decision. You're able to kind of look at different sets of information, weigh them together to decide how seriously should we take a threat, do we need to change messaging in a certain market, why, etc.
So seeing some of the things that we discussed at the beginning of the conversation, around these failed drug launches not meeting expectations, and there being such a significant number of them, this seems like this is an example where AI could sort of revolutionize that and really change the way things have been going.
Yes, I think if you're, if you rethink the idea that all of this manual work we're doing to kind of gather market signals and organize them together and even communicate them, which is something important as well. It's really, really important. We talk to companies all the time and said, it's not that we don't have data, it's that we don't do anything with what we have, or we're not able to change what we're doing, the narrative, because of internal momentum process, what have you. These sorts of tools can help with all of that and make it more nimble and empower the folks making strategy decisions to have much more confidence, data-backed confidence that the changes they're making are in fact warranted. And then they can see how that impacts things over time. So I think it does change the feeling of kind of helplessness that I think can be inherent during a launch, where you don't have the map, you're just driving and you're hoping you're on the right road, to I'm feeling good that I'm on the right road, or if I'm going to take a different road, I'm feeling good about why I'm taking that different road. And it's easy for me to convince other stakeholders in my company as to why we're going to do that, because I've got data to support it, versus it's just my ability to convince based on pure politics or pure momentum or et cetera.
Yeah, and I think where we continue to build on that, I liked your word confidence there, because we also hear that on the flip side of, you talk about, is AI revolutionizing this part? It is, in the sense of it is a revolutionary step, but you have to get that adoption. You have to have people understand how this can help empower their launch and get them to the right signals and pivot faster if you need to, or keep on the course. And that's another area we spent a lot of time in our solution, is showing how the data comes to be. How did you go through that data, make a decision, have our tool recommend different scenarios or different actions, and show the data behind it. So it's not just analyzing one point in data and saying, okay, now I've got to try to guess how I make decisions off this. Because we're holistically looking at it, we can give them confidence in the answer. And that's a big part of the revolution, is the adoption. And that's, we know from the gate that we have to provide that clarity and transparency and responsibility in our AI to show off what we're doing and how we're helping them make that decision, and to support the data that's coming out to then take to their leadership or pivot.
If we were to sit here 3 years from now, what would you say a truly successful launch organization would look like, and what would separate the winners from the laggards?
Maybe I'll hit that from like an organizational standpoint. I think a lot of the silos, again, as you traverse from like medical to commercial and maybe include market access in that, a lot of the traditional silos we have are because it is so difficult to gather certain sets of data with certain different missions along the way. I think what we're going to see is a continued blending of those functions as it pertains to launch. Launch really is a continuum. It's not separate milestones as you go. And I think you're seeing more and more organizations with different organizational models and different approaches trying to blend that together. I think if these tools make it easier to understand what's happening in the market, I think that becomes even faster. And I think those tools that can really have a blended team approach to launches are going to see more effective outcomes than those that remain in the traditional silos. So that's, I think, is one of the biggest difference. And I think how that's going to manifest itself are those teams that are able to course correct better and faster along the way to a launch, and start off in a better place as well with a launch in terms of where the market is relative to the therapy. Those things, I think, are going to drive better results, and I think noticeably better results on targets, hitting targets, for companies that embrace these sorts of approaches versus those who remain where we were, having those results that you opened up with around half to 2/3 not hitting targets that they expected.
And looking to 2026 and beyond, what are some steps that commercial teams can take to ensure that they're getting successful launches, but also in tandem with that, to hammer that home, what would you say is the biggest risk for pharma companies if they don't take those steps to ensure successful launches?
I guess a couple of things come to mind with that. One, I think those companies that aren't exploring these new techniques are going to fall behind those who are. There's going to be missteps along the way. There always is with new technology adoption. We haven't really talked too much about a compliance angle here, but obviously we're in a regulated industry with heavy compliance barriers that affects how doing things different way can actually roll out at scale. But those companies that are leaning into these sorts of approaches are going to have a sizable advantage, especially as time goes on, to those who are not. And it's not something you can just quickly catch up on. The other thing I will say is those companies that have the proper balance between what am I building in-house versus what am I partnering with are going to be able to go faster. Those who have that balance in too much in one direction are going to end up wasting money and slowing down.
I think it's organizations where it starts at the top as well, as Lance was talking about, the adoption and creating this ubiquity of using these tools. That has to come from leadership, right? Where we see a lot of times there's leaders along the way, but leadership themselves are not bought into the shifting paradigm of leveraging these tools to empower their teams to make those decisions and move faster. So one of the areas that we continue to see is the ones who will hit and the one you look forward, it's going to be from top down. The leaders who are embracing these tools, understanding, as Lance said, that they're not always perfect, but they're going to make better outcomes in the end by adoption. That's where I really think in 26 we'll start to see the winners versus the laggards.
And I have one final forward-looking question for both of you. Just in general, when it comes to AI, are there any emerging trends, into 2026 and beyond that you're particularly excited about or that are really kind of on your horizon?
Yeah, I would say I'll give you two technical, geeky ones, being the CTO, and then a more philosophical. Ones that we're really excited about are companies looking at agentic AI, not because it's trendy and cool to be on the front line making decisions, but really leveraging it for the back office work. Really that mundane, repetitive data analysis, compliance, regulatory development, things that can be done and move faster because you're able to make those decisions where usually you have very long chains of individuals who have to make those decisions and the complexity of that. For adoption, we see a lot of promise in co-pilots. So it's not a one-size-fits-all tool that you have to go into. It's something helping you out along the way through your day. So if you're in the field force and the commercial side, you're getting those nudges, you're getting the information you need in those moments to make those changes. And I say last, like more philosophical, just the rate of adoption. We're really excited about that. I think, we've all been through technology trends. Lance and I are old enough to remember the dot-com booms and some of the other, the cloud shift. But this parallels to me a lot more like the cloud shift, right? I remember when we had to make the changes and come off all our NOC servers, convince your CFO and your CIO that you needed to move to the cloud, but the AWS and Azure were very young and not all the tools were there, and lots of missteps for sure, and you're trying to figure out that cost and where the ROI lies. This is the same, just more compelling, because it really is an industry shift. So I think as we as end users are adapting to AI in every part of our life, outside of our day job, and our customers and our users outside of their jobs at pharma are adapting to using AI. That rate of change, that rate of adoption, I think that's going to be the really powerful thing that we're interested in. And then with that, just where we're going to be 3 years, the decisions we can make, and the data we have access to then. So I think that's the power of the adoption.
Yeah, I think building on what Jason's saying, the thing I'm most excited about are all the AI things that have absolutely nothing to do with pharma. That's what's actually most exciting for pharma. You have company after company and billions and billions and billions of dollars of people using these tools to everything from help you shop online to, you name it. There's companies out there using this new paradigm to change how we work as humans. And so what that means is if I'm a leader trying to have my organization adopt pharmaceutical-centric AI types of solutions, what I do know is the rest of the world is making my employees aware of these tools, and eventually, almost whether they want to or not, they're going to end up using a lot of them, and they're going to feel more comfortable and natural. So I think you can draft off the overall investment. The overall investment in AI right now exceeds the overall investment in global drug development, period. That's a massive amount of capital shifting, and that really, I think, is going to help this technology feel normal for people much faster than some of the previous technology waves that we've seen.
Yeah, I think you both kind of touched on this notion that a few years into the AI hype, I guess, it's kind of moved beyond buzzword, and we are now in that adoption phase. Mm-hmm. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on AI tools like Launch Intelligence and other tools that pop up. Lance and Jason, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Lance and Jason for joining us. I'm Lesha Bushak, Pharma Editor at MM+M, and thank you to our audience for tuning in.